Hi everyone, Beth Ray with MyCounselor.Online. I'm talking with Josh Spurlock, the director for MyCounselor.Online, and we're discussing part 5 of the Affair Recovery Guide. This particular article is about confessing the affair and the do's and don'ts of that. We are talking about when the bomb drops, that 0 to 10 minute time frame when this is actually happening. And this is an incredible article, not just to read if this is something that you're going through as a betrayed spouse, but if you are the one that is doing the betraying, please read this article. It really is incredibly helpful in guiding the disclosure. And Josh, I want to bring you in on this particular, just verbiage and what, talk to us about what disclosure is, because you talk about disclosure and discovery. What are those terms?
Right. So discovery is when a spouse stumbles upon or finds out through their own investigatory process, or just from it falling in their lap, or somebody coming and telling them that their spouse is having an affair, is cheating on them, that there's a betrayal that's taking place. And so that's where you as a betrayed spouse you discover the betrayal, that something has taken place, which is different than a confession or disclosure, where a betraying spouse brings that information to you on their own volition, by their own choice, out of a contriteness, a desire to deal with that and be able to move forward and reconcile in the relationship. And then within disclosure, we talk about informal disclosure versus formal disclosure. Informal disclosure is that event where the betrayed spouse reveals what is going on, either on their own choice or after their spouse has discovered the affair, and confesses or shares some information about what has taken place. And it's informal in the sense that it's not with the structure of a professional counselor kind of helping you walk through that process. And that's typically what happens prior to the phone call to the counselor's office to set up a counseling appointment. And so it's that informal disclosure event or the discovery event that leads to the counseling appointment being set up. But there's a significant difference between an informal disclosure and a formal disclosure, in that as professional counselors, marriage counselors, affair recovery counselors, we have walked out this road with hundreds and hundreds of couples over thousands of hours, and we have sat through these experiences, and we know how they go well, and what's the best case scenario for working through them in a way that leads towards healing, and what is not the best way that can be more sabotaging and more destructive. And we know what questions to ask to make sure that we have all the information that we need, and that all the information is out on the table in order to know how to move forward. And so that's really the different kinds of disclosure that we think of when this is coming out, when an affair is coming out.
Okay, so let's just get down to the guts of the issue when it comes to disclosure. Common lies of disclosure, and this is something that I thought was very well written and very true, where the betraying spouse, when it comes to whether or not you want to disclose what you're doing, that you don't want to because you want to protect your spouse's heart.
Sure. And sometimes that's absolute baloney. And sometimes it's really genuine, that it's not true, it's a lie to believe that you are protecting your spouse by lying to them in both cases. That rather you believe that, and you genuinely feel the weight of how hurtful this knowledge is going to be to them, or whether or not you just want to avoid the discomfort of having to go through that. It's still a lie that what your spouse doesn't know will hurt them. And it's not the trip to the oncologist where you get the long face from the doctor and they tell you that you have cancer that kills you in there. It's not the trip to the doctor where you find out what's happening that causes the harm to the body. It's the cancer that causes the harm. It's not the disclosure. It's not the confessing. It's the betrayal that's created the damage that's here. The revealing of that creates an opportunity to address that damage in a way that can lead to healing. And so we need to make sure that we differentiate that it's the truth isn't what destroys, the truth isn't what kills, the truth isn't what hurts, the truth is what sets free. The truth is what leads to healing. It's what leads to change in the situation. It's the betrayal that is what is damaged. And when that has happened, it's happened. That it's past tense. It's already taken place. There isn't any undoing it. There's only dealing with it in a healthy way going forward so that healing can take place.
Well, there's also a lie that you talk about that at first I was like, the person that's being betrayed, there's no lies that they give themselves if they're the ones that are being betrayed. But the one that you say in here, I thought, oh no, I have heard people say that before, which when you are the betrayed spouse, the lie is, I don't want to know. I just don't even want to go there.
Right. Avoidance is normal. That, there's denial in place that we would rather kind of cover our eyes and not look at it and pretend like this isn't happening, and that. And so I just would rather not know that, what that really means is I'd really not have to go through the pain and the hurt that this is going to require, than that I really don't want to be having to go through this. That's what that translates into, and it's absolutely true. You don't want that, but unfortunately you haven't been given that choice, and that the betrayed spouse has injured you, has wounded you by way of their choices in that. And while you can have the belief that what I don't know won't hurt me, it doesn't prove to be true. What you don't know prevents you from being able to heal and to move forward. And it's absolutely true within the marriage relationship that even if the affair isn't disclosed, that it damages the relationship because it creates emotional distance and disconnection between the couple, which leads to the relationship degrading over time and eventually falling apart without us even necessarily fully understanding how it happened or why it happened.
Okay, so we've discussed now those common lies, and let's just say hypothetically that has been now worked through, and someone decides that the truth is best, so they disclose or they discover, however that works out, that this is happening in their lives. The very next thing is the response, right? And that's what you go into in the next part of your article is helpful versus unhelpful responses. And one of my favorite things that you talk about is there are responses, and a number of them that are very justified in how you feel and what you want to do in the moment. But are they helpful responses?
Right, and that's the discussion that we're trying to have, right? We're trying to figure out how do we get through this in the most healthy way possible? How do we heal? How do we recover from this? And there are things that are helpful to that end, and there are things that are unhelpful to that end. Even if they're completely justifiable, some things aren't helpful. And so what we want to do is guide folks through a process that has the highest likelihood of healing in the fastest way possible in moving forward. And so part of that helpfulness is thinking through how do we handle this topic of disclosure and confession. And best case scenario for that is always in the context of a professional counselor setting, because again, the experience that the counselor brings to the table, and not all counselors are the same or equal in this regard, because there's different areas of specialization for counselors, and most adolescent counselors are child and family counselors that are working with children aren't necessarily doing a lot of affair recovery work, and so they haven't necessarily had hundreds and hundreds of affair recovery situations and thousands of hours of working through these disclosure topics. And so sometimes they don't necessarily know how to guide a couple through this. So you really want to work with somebody that has extensive experience working with betrayals and affair recovery so that they can help you do this well in a way that will lead to healing. But one of the normal natural responses for a betrayed spouse is, I want all the details right now. There's a sense of urgency that says, I've discovered this and I'm going to confront my spouse and they're going to spill their guts and you're going to tell me right now what is going on in this place. And that's a completely normal and natural response. And it is valid for you to desire for your spouse to admit, to own how they have wounded you or hurt you in situation. And they should. Now, in terms of, though, how much detail they go into in that context, I would caution you to wait to find out the details until you can work through it with somebody that can help you navigate that, because there are things that can be hurtful to you. Vivid details of what affair partners, what your spouse did with their affair partner, things like that, they can't be unheard, and that they can create mental images and pictures that can haunt for years to come in ways that are not helpful to you personally, whether you stay with your spouse or not, that they continue to do damage to you. They were destructive to the spouse to participate in. They're destructive to have in your head. And so we really need to think through what level of detail is beneficial in that. And that's not for the betraying spouse to determine. It's not the betraying spouse's job to decide what they think is helpful or not helpful for their spouse. That's not a choice you get to make as the betraying spouse. But it is something that the betrayed spouse needs to work through with an unbiased professional who wants to help them not hurt themselves in the process of trying to figure out how to get through this.
So if you are the betraying spouse and they're watching this right now and they're thinking, okay, I need to come clean with my spouse. I know because the type of person he or she is, they're going to want to know those details. Mm-hmm. How do you express the fact that you don't want to get into those details without looking like you're hiding something, and sure, that it's out of care and you want to do it in the appropriate way? How should they respond to a spouse that is demanding to know everything right then when they know this isn't the right time?
Sure, you have lied as a betraying spouse in the situation, and so you've hidden, you've betrayed, you've broken your word, and so it's going to be completely normal and natural and wise for your spouse to think you're full of malarkey and for them to not believe your motives. How can I believe that you're looking out for my best interest when you've done this to me and that? And so there's nothing that you can say that's going to convince your spouse of the good nature of your motives. And so you can just let go of that, and that they're going to be hurt, they're going to be angry, they're going to assume the worst motives regardless of what your heart is. And what matters to you and what matters for you is that you do the right thing and what it is you need to do to live up to the character that you desire to have and that you are accountable for before God, and that you do what's needed as you work through the situation. And so communicating on the right up front your willingness to engage in full disclosure says that I'm completely willing to talk through and to share every single piece of information that a professional that we work with encourages me to do so and put out there, because I want to do this well, and I want to try to help us get through this if we can get through this. And so I want I want to let somebody help walk us through this so it doesn't do you more harm than I have already done in this situation. And so I will completely be forthright, honest, and share everything that somebody that's helping us through this communicates to me is going to be beneficial and helpful in this process. So that humility and that willingness for transparency is huge, and is a good sign for a betrayed spouse to see coming from the betraying spouse, that demonstration of humility. If you're watching this and you haven't yet disclosed, shared with your spouse, you're feeling that conviction that you need to confess what it is that's going on, what I'd encourage you to do is I'd encourage you to set up an appointment with a counselor for yourself right away and have a conversation with a counselor about how to go about doing that best before you just dump it on your spouse and put them in a vulnerable place without support, and with you stumbling your way through how to do that in the process, doing more damage to your spouse. So take responsibility, set up an appointment, talk with somebody through how to go about disclosing and beginning that process with your spouse.
So let's talk about full disclosure for a minute and how difficult that is for people very naturally to do, but how important it is. In the article, you talk about how common it is to have somebody that dribbles, and explain to everybody what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, disclosure is probably the least fun thing that I do as a professional counselor. We have to deal with a lot of difficult situations, but working through affair disclosure is painful and is hard for everyone involved. And that is true for the betrayed spouse, but it's also true for the betraying spouse, that getting real and confessing the way you've been hurtful to your spouse, confessing a betrayal, is one of the most difficult things that a person will ever do in their life. And the difficulty of that and the pain of that can lead to all sorts of less than helpful approaches to disclosure. One being just straight up lying. And that is, the article says, and what we say is lying is normal. It's not healthy, it's not okay, it's not right, it's sinful, but it's normal. That we get wrapped up in our own lies that really lead to the affair in the first place, and the deepening of the affair and the continuing of the affair. That we believe the lies of the enemy and we convince ourselves of things that aren't true, and that's how we get ourselves into those situations. And so we're continuing to be wrapped up in those lies as we're trying to disclose or work our way out of the affair situation. And so we tell ourselves that, we're sparing our spouse by not telling them, that it's our mistake, our burden to bear. We're going to keep it to ourselves and never tell a soul, and we're going to be martyrs and throw ourselves on that, which is just, again, baloney. It's a lie that we tell ourselves and believe, but isn't true. And we're not really helping our spouse recover, heal, move forward. We're just, not disclosing the cancer while it festers and makes things worse over time. And so we need to address that lie. But there's also this, what we call the dribble effect that you mentioned, and that's where we decide to confess, or information is discovered by our spouse, and so we feel compelled to share some information. But we just share part of the picture, part of the story, a little bit of information, and then our spouse finds something else and more information dribbles out. And then our spouse finds something else and more information dribbles out. And it just dribbles out little by little over time in this long, painful, ugly situation that makes it worse. It further damages your credibility. It makes healing more difficult. Then it prolongs the process of getting through this in a way that's completely unhelpful. And sometimes that's intentional because there's hiding on the part of the betraying spouse, and sometimes it's unintentional. Sometimes they just didn't know that a piece of information was relevant. They didn't know that a piece of information was going to be important to their spouse, or they were nervous and they just forgot a piece of information. And so the ripple effect doesn't always happen because of intentional deception. Sometimes it just happens for other reasons. But that's, again, where a professional counselor is going to be helpful, because they're going to know which questions to ask, what details are important, and to help get the things out that need to be gotten out in order to address the situation and move forward in a healthy way.
You talk also about places and situations that are appropriate for a disclosure and not appropriate for a disclosure.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Give us some advice on that.
Yeah, it's we hear horror stories at times, and what we're trying to do within this list and this article is to try to help folks avoid those things. Things that should definitely be avoided is in front of the kids. It's not appropriate for, even as a betrayed spouse, that you've discovered that something's happening, your kids are sitting around the living room, and you're going to go after your spouse to get the details about the betrayal that's taken place. It's completely understandable the urgency that you might feel to do that. However, it's not beneficial to you. It's not beneficial to the kids. There's a better time and place to do that. Likewise, if you're the betraying spouse, to dump that on your spouse, and confess that to them in a context where they have kids that they are responsible for and that they have to watch, and they don't actually have opportunity to ask questions, to process, to deal with what it is, because they have to be a parent on duty. That's not a responsible time to do it. Under the influence of liquid courage, sometimes we in alcohol involved in situation, be intoxicated and get the wise idea that we're going to get this off of our chests and deal with the situation. Not helpful in that. That's you're just setting up for things to be a mess and more painful and destructive for your spouse than you have already made them. Or after 9 p.m. at night, there's these things come out, sometimes, especially as like a betrayed spouse, you come across a Facebook account or a message or a text or something that you discover the affair, and it's late in the evening, and we're going to go after it right now. And you are exhausted. Your body's tired. It's late at night. Your spouse is also. The likelihood of that being productive is next to none. You guys fighting until the wee hours of the morning with your brains half on is not going to benefit you at all. It is better to put that in a box, to reach out to some help if you suspect that's going on, and let a counselor kind of talk you through how to approach that situation and to proceed from there. In public, at our spouse's place of work, social media, via text, over the phone, in a car, moving down the highway at 70 miles an hour. These are not ideal times to try to confess or to confront a spouse about an affair situation.
You have at the very end of your article a note for the betraying spouse, and I thought it was very well done, and I'll certainly let you add to it however you want to, but it's basically saying the motive behind why you're disclosing needs to be the right one. It should not be just out of relief for yourself, but to help your spouse heal and for them to be able to make plans for their future. Is there anything you want to add to that, Josh?
Yeah, I would just say back to the earlier comment to the betraying spouse, if you're watching this, that is, if you truly have a desire to handle this in the right way, then connect with somebody that can help you walk through this, because you getting it off your chest and just dumping it on your spouse without A, doing that well yourself, or B, envisioning some support in ways in which they can be helped through the process when this is their world is rocked by this information, is very selfish And so if you want to do that well, take the steps necessary to do that well.
And I know this is an article discussion, and I promise you I'm not trying to make a plug, but I know whenever you're thinking about the logistics of actually calling someone, meeting a counselor to try to get help, and you don't know how you're going to work that in without your spouse knowing and getting curious of what you're doing. MyCounselor.Online provides a service through my device where you can actually talk to a counselor from your office, from your car, face to face. It's exactly what Josh and I are using now. So we really encourage you to go to MyCounselor.Online, read this article, Affair Recovery Guide, Part 5, Confessing the Affair, the Do's and Don'ts, and look into getting some help, and help that is very easy to get, that can be right where you are. We hope you take advantage of it, and we hope to talk to you soon.